One. Yes. Good evening, everyone. Wherever you are, good day, good evening, good morning, whatever time you're watching this. Welcome to AdesojiSpeaksKnowledge, where we delve into pivotal moments that shaped Africa's destiny. Today, we embark on a historical journey to bring us to contemporary times. We're looking to explore the reverberating echoes of the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, one of the most pivotal events that laid the groundwork for what Africa is currently experiencing. With me this evening is a gentleman, a co-host, a guest, a long-standing guest. We go back a long way, but I will not steal his thunder. I will allow him to introduce himself. My friend's name is Demola Adeusi. Can you do the more in-depth introduction of yourself, please?
Thank you, Adesoji. It's a pleasure to be here. I've seen a lot of work that you're doing about reawakening the Renaissance in Africa, of Africans, and I really enjoy what you're doing. My name is Ademola Adeusi. I have been a student of international relations and international politics since 1990. So I have a basic degree in international relations, and I have postgraduate degrees in peace and public studies. And, studied border management and migration management in Africa for about 7-8 years. And so I can be called a border and migration expert. And I am an African. I see things from the African prison, from the African perspective. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Without further ado, let's lay a background for people to understand what we're talking about. When we're talking about the Berlin Conference, this was a conference that was called by Otto Bismarck of Germany, called a group of powers, specifically the United States, Britain, France, Germany, Belgium. But Belgium came there vis-a-vis the personality of one person, King Leopold of Belgium. And suffice to say, the objective of the conference itself was to formalize, which is quite funny, European colonization and to carve up Africa. Whatever it was left of Africa then, I will explain that, into sphere of influence without considering African voices and sovereignty. That is key. When I said carve up whatever was left of Africa, we have to understand that prior to this conference itself, there's been what was then known as the scramble itself, which started in the early 1870s, where most of them just went in and just started planting their flags all over the places, signing treaties with people who didn't quite understand what they were signing themselves up for. But all the same, bringing said treaties to the conference allowed them to formalize whatever their territorial claims were on swaths of land in Africa. The impact of that, we would say, has left devastating consequences for African nations as we have them today. You just need to look across the entire continent. Wherever you find conflict, it's usually across the old flagged territories. Although it must be said there were people with, tribal differences at the time, but nothing of this scale where, complete annihilation of people, decimation, and continual acrimony has been the order of the day. And which is why this conversation is very important. And we're going to talk today about the legacy of that conference. That legacy, based on the decisions made at that conference, which perpetuates systemic injustices, economic disparities, social upheavals across the continent. And so, Ademola, just looking at the continent in 2024, I don't even want to date this. 2024, do you see any significant difference from what has transpired in the 60s when, were considered to have been given flagged independence, as I would like to describe it?
think that the purported independence of African states in the 60s and some of them in the 70s has become glaring as a ruse and in several parts of Africa. And if you look at, the trajectory of African development, either the human development, economic development, or political development, at every point where Africa is trying to get it right, you see the albatross of, the Berlin Conference still pulling the skirts of Africa and saying, look, you guys can go beyond these primordial divisions that we have created for you to suboptimize your states and make sure that you can move into a new stage of new colonial subjugation. Let's look at it this way. If you look at, let me just take, you were talking about King Leopold. Let's take a look at the Congo. Despite the fact that we have fragmented the Congo and we have planted several flags in the Congo and divided the Congo into 3 separate states, none of those states is viable. None of those states has not been plagued by fratricidal wars. And you look at the Congo, and you see that it is one of the most blessed places on earth in terms of resources, in terms of manpower, in terms of hardworking people. But what do you see in the Congo? You see penury, you see poverty, and you see continued enslavement of not only the people, but the resources that have been given to that land, purely because of the fact that the seeds of the war, the seeds of contest were planted right there in the 60s when that country was fashioned. And if you look at the fact that Belgium took that territory and plundered it for ages and committed some of the worst atrocities that the world has ever seen after the Holocaust. And nobody's talking about that. They're not holding Belgium accountable for that. Now, what has happened is that every other party has just joined in the looting of the Congo. So what has changed? Nothing has changed. Now, let's come to East Africa, East and Southern Africa. If you look at those places, we find out that the settler mentality took over. The whites did not want to leave. In fact, if you look at South Africa, more than 70% of the land in South Africa is still in the hands of the white man. And you now want to tell me that there was independence. If you look at that economy up till now, structurally, that economy is still in the hands of the white man. And if you look at Kenya, if you look at Tanzania, if you look at all the coastal areas in those countries, you will see the white man owns a lot of that, owns a lot of the prime property in those places. So what level of independence? Let's now come to West Africa. And let's bifurcate West Africa into 2. Just like the Berlin Conference did. We have the Francophone and the Anglophone countries. If you look at the Francophone countries, you shouldn't even be talking about independence. A situation where a certain percentage of the riches of your country, your external reserves, must be given warehouse in France does not say you're independent. A situation where your own military is seconded, so to say, and second guessed by France, having to tell you what to do with your own military, tells you we're not independent. A situation where your ability to produce manufacture is subjugated to the whims and caprice of someone in France is not independence. In fact, one of the jokes I used to hear whenever I visited Cotonou was that, my Beninois brothers enjoyed eating French baguette than, bread made in Cotonou. They enjoyed eating bread that was made 2 days ago in France and flown into Cotonou than eating, baguette that was made in Cotonou. So that's French West Africa. So of what, and you're seeing a lot of things happening now. Earlier yesterday, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger said they were pulling out of ECOWAS because they are now ruled by military juntas who are now supported by Russia and other shadow factors against the French. We're still seeing a lot of, Russia was not part of the Berlin Conference, but Russia is saying, well, you guys had yours in 1885. We're going to have our own in 2020. And China is also playing. Let's look at Let's look at Nigeria as a case study
Mm.
for the Anglophone countries. And you look at a country where the British just decided to create a new elite class for themselves. At a particular time,
Mm.
the British empowered the military to take over the country. And they told a particular section of the country, go join the military because the military is going to take over your country. And the back and forth in military coups that happened in Nigeria
Mm.
became watersheds and watermarks for ethnic identity, ethnic contest. If you look at the
Mm.
Agoye Ronsi coup, people will tell you it was an Igbo coup. And then people will tell you 1966, people will then tell you that the counter coup was an Hausa coup. And what happened after that was the Civil War in 1967. And that civil war became another Berlin referendum because some countries supported Biafra because they wanted Nigeria to break, because they said
Mm-hmm.
Nigeria was too large
True.
and will wield interest in West Africa against the French and West African countries. So some people supported Biafra, and some people readily gave arms to Nigeria to ensure that Nigeria was able to um, win Biafra. So if
Mm.
you look at all of this in 2024, the marks of 1885, you can still see them all over Africa. You can still see um, Mamadou Sidibe not being able to speak to Mamadou Gazama in the African Cup of Nations. You're seeing, the laziness of the colonialists in the flags of the nations. You see, I mean, if you
Mm.
look at the way African nations were named, they talk about lazy. Nigeria was named by somebody who just felt, well, the Niger. Not thinking that obviously there was another country that was already called the Niger, but the
Mm.
French was called the Niger. If you
Mm.
look at the
Mm.
flags of most African countries, they are lazy. You just see red, green, yellow on one side, and then you see another one that is green, red, yellow. I mean, so you look at this, and an African needs to learn another language to speak
Mm.
to another African who needs to
Mm.
learn another language to reply. So, the marks of 1885 are obviously still with us in 2024.
Mm. 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 Okay, so the question then comes to, if that is the position, so what did the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, Modibo Keita, Sekou unfortunately, we don't quite have a Pan-African leader. And when I say we, Nigerians, um, what legacy, what's happened to their legacy?
Okay. The legacy of these very strong Africans
Mm.
was undermined by these same players who were in the Berlin Conference. Now,
Mm.
let me give you an example. Who talked about the fact that the Congo had enough resources to feed itself? Who talked about
Uh,
the fact
mm.
that the Congo could rule itself if the Western countries let it alone?
Mm.
Who became the leader of the Congo and was trying to harness the resources and say, look, can you guys stay off our resources? We'll fight our own internal battles and we will sort it out and we will become a strong nation. So
Patrice
what
Lumumba?
happened to that man, Patrice Mulumba?
Mm.
So when you
Mm.
see a lot of Kwame Nkrumah talked about a Pan-African uh, vision that was way ahead of his time. I mean, when I saw that Rwanda recently said, now, you don't have to take a visa. You don't have to line up in an embassy and take a visa to come to Rwanda. And
Mm.
I'm seeing some reincarnation of the Pan-African stance of some of these nations. When I listen
Mm.
to, Julius Malema now, I mean, what's and all, Julius Malema is saying, look, why don't you make the African comfortable on the soil of the African continent
Mm.
instead of having to go dance at an airport when a white man shows up?
Mm.
And
Mm.
there were African leaders who were visionary. There were African leaders who were who were really interested in the development of the African continent. Some of these people were deliberately suboptimized by the colonial powers. Some of them were killed in
mm,
their attempts to liberate their people. Some of
mm,
them were compromised, and some were overthrown by coups instigated by these same powers. Some had the economies of their countries attacked, sanctions, barred by this same, this same powers. Uh, I remember, during the Second World War, even before, independence, Nigerians were being taken to Burma to fight on
mm.
behalf of the British Empire. And I was wondering, hey, what did the what did the Germans do to Nigerians? And what did they come back home with? A lot of them came back with, it wasn't diagnosed then, but it was PSTD, post-traumatic,
Mm.
stress disorder, and we used to call all of them Baba Soldier, that they were behaving erratically.
Oh,
And some of them
theoretically, yeah, 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 yeah,
erratically
yeah.
mental issues and
Mm,
all of that.
mm, mm, mm,
Now, in Nigeria, the British actually brought the Anglo-Nigerian Defense Pact of 1957 that Nigeria was supposed to sign, that if the British were to ever get into any war anywhere in the world, Nigeria would be obligated to send
true.
people to fight for.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
if you look at all of that, and the leaders in Nigeria then said, no, we're not going to sign this. And it was one of the reasons that was adduced to say that some of the leaders in Nigeria at that point were too intelligent, too sharp, and because of that, they would not be given the power. So if you look at all of this, even in the selection of our leaders,
Hmm.
the colonial powers wanted to hand over power to whoever they wanted to hand it over to. So even if you were visionary, you were intelligent, you were a nationalist, you were a patriotic person, that actually puts a target, a mark
On
on your back
on your back.
instead of you
Hmm.
being the kind of person that the colonials wanted to hand over to. So if you look at a lot of these people we mentioned, Nkrumah, Koulibaly, Kenyatta, even Mandela, during the apartheid era. The issue
Yeah.
now is your love of your people, your intellect, which is supposed to make your leadership visionary, makes you an endangered species in the hands of the colonialists.
Hmm.
And because of that, the colonialists will decide to use the military against you. That is, if
Hmm.
they cannot compromise you character-wise, or if they cannot assassinate you, like the case of Patrice Lumumba.
Hmm. One of the reasons for having this conversation actually was a post I read on Facebook a couple of weeks ago, and the post was I paraphrase now. You South Africans, whatever it is you do, make sure the white man does not leave, because if he does leave, and stop believing in all this Pan-Africanist nonsense. When I read that, I was a bit taken aback. I said, what happened here? Was it the education? Or was it the examples? Or what was it that will make someone, because I saw the name, it's clearly a Nigerian who typed this out, but took the time, the pain to construct such a sentence, to say South Africa that is questioning what you alluded to earlier, the European population holding 70% of the land. Asking questions of that is somehow being silly or being obtrusive.
I first is I am one of those who believe now that our education as Africans need to be augmented currently. And
Hmm,
it's one of the things that I'm working on with some people to create a curriculum that doesn't put you into servitude right from age 6, age 7.
hmm,
I'm one of those who believe strongly that as long as we still have the curriculum that makes the white man's language superior to the language we speak in Africa,
hmm,
we will continue to be the lost in transit generation. And I say that because you cannot be more British than the British. You cannot be more French.
and
French. But if
France
you are
Fanon.
Magenta, you are Madinka. If you're Yoruba, you're Yoruba. If you're Zulu or you're Xhosa, that is your identity. And I'm not being primordial. And I'm saying that, you see, when people look at things, especially when they look at symbolisms, and they think that whenever the white man rules a place, the place will prosper. Or whenever a black man rules a place, the place will be in ruins. That already tells me that your education is faulty. And I'll give you examples. There are places in the world that are ruled by our Caucasian brothers, and they are not doing very well. What a lot of people don't understand is that Africa has gone through trauma that entitles Africa to reparations to be paid for at least 200 years. Let me explain. If you went through 400 years of slavery, a period where your culture, your language, your food, everything was stolen from you, and more importantly, the most important fabric of your society, the most productive fabric of your society, the youth segment, were taken away and scattered all over the world for 400 years. The fact that you exist now is actually a miracle. It's actually a miracle. That's one. So take 400 years of slavery, then take another 100 years or 150 years of colonialism. It means that for half of a century, African brains have been taken away and used to develop these Western countries that we're talking about. That's one. Second is that a lot of these Western countries got free labor for 400 years. I mean, if I got free labor for 6 months on some of the projects I run now, I'll be very happy. But imagine countries getting slave, labor for 400 years. So that is one of the things that we're talking about. Now, the legacy now continued with the colonial idea that white is for the Caucasians and black is for Africa. First, there's nobody that is white, except angels exist and they are white. And there's nobody that is black. We are shades, different shades of skins and all of that. But you see, Africans look at some countries and believe that those countries don't have problems. I know somebody who left Nigeria and said, look, Nigeria, not good, and I'm going to America. Got to Houston, Texas, and was shocked within a week of arriving in Houston, Texas. I could have been that kind of statistics in that same city in 2019. So now you see a lot of people idolize, and I think it's some level of Stockholm syndrome. Every nation in the world, whether ruled by a white man or by a black man, has major issues. There are traps and entrapments that are already on the way of Africa developing. Why isn't Africa getting fair trade? Why are diamonds in South Africa, in Congo, in Botswana, and the exchanges in Belgium? Why do we have gold all over Africa? And the gold exchange, the gold price is determined somewhere else. Why does Switzerland make more chocolate than Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Nigeria? Right? And these things are not new. They've been there for a while. There's a reason why these things are there. They're there to make you feel inferior. They're there to make you feel that, look, unless my chocolate, which originated in Ghana, is from Pharaoh, is from Switzerland, then it's not good chocolate. So when you have 400, 500 years of that typography, what then happens is somebody constructs that and says, look, despite the fact that 70% of your land has been taken by the white man, South Africans make sure they don't leave because you are going to mess up your own land. Now, every nation goes through some pangs of nation building. Americans went through a confederation war like that. And the British, hey, I can tell you, there was a time that London was filled with horse manure on the streets. And, there was a time that Philadelphia was suffering from measles, and it took a slave man from Africa, from Nigeria, to tell them what to use. Now, the point is that everybody doesn't want Africa to develop. And I'll tell you why. Where
Go
would
on.
you get your rare earth metals from to make iPhones at the rate at which you sell them, at the rate at which you buy them from the Congo? Where would
Hmm.
you get your cocoa from? Where would you get? So you are not even seeing fair trade. You're not seeing fair trade. You're not seeing fair, there's a new international division of labor, and Africa is carefully kept out of that uh, division of labor. I remember in 2018, Rwanda was sanctioned for not taking um, for not taking used clothing from America. America said, we will not give you aid unless you take used clothing from America and buy them. And you're seeing a lot of these things happening. And a lot of people, yes, in 2000, you can Google this. And a lot of Africans don't understand that there is a structure. There is structural violence against Africa. And because of that structural violence, you think they're doing you a favor when they come to Africa and pledge aid to you and say, I'm going to give you $40 billion to do this and to do that. Why don't you give me access to your own economy the same way you have access to my own economy?
Hmm. Hmm.
Why don't you give me the same opportunities that you would have in this place? So I will not blame that person, but I will say that that person is suffering from some level of mental colonialism that I cannot blame him for. Lastly, on
Hmm.
this, a lot of Africans don't even read African history or African leaders like the ones we mentioned. If you ask a lot of Africans now, have you read Kwame Nkrumah? Have you read Thomas Sankara? Have you read Jomo Kenyatta? Have you even read Road to Freedom by Mandela? No.
Mandela, yeah.
If you ask a few Africans now, what's in your reading list? What are you reading? And what are you, tell me your best, your best books. You see them talk about, my best book is Lin Kuan Yew. You see them talk about, people um, whereas right there in your own background are people who have spoken about your ancestors and spoken about your future in ways that
Hmm.
if you kept that, you would be able to do better. But so the lack of historical awareness, the lack of historical appreciation will let someone wake up and say, well, South Africans, we know that a white person forced you guys through the Boer Trek and took you guys away from your ancestral lands. But please make sure they don't leave. Make sure they live there, and you continue to struggle. And I think it's Stockholm syndrome anyway.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, again, speaking of legacies, you talk about the trek. That trek now brings me to the latest utterances of the German government in relation to what is happening in Gaza. And I bring that back to the continent in the sense that, again, we're talking about cognitive dissonance when you've committed atrocities on the continent. But because, again, like you said, if we don't have a historical appreciation of what it is we're talking about, you won't know to stand up and speak. By that, I'm saying with what happened between 1904 and 1908 in Southwest Africa, Namibia,
Namibia.
to the Hereros and the Nama people. Now, here is a massacre that was not only perpetrated, and it wasn't impromptu, it was actually planned because there's an extermination order signed. So again, we're talking about the Berlin Conference. This is someone deciding, I own where you live. I even own you. And yet, we don't have the wherewithal to understand that this problem exists amongst us. And it's one of the reasons why the issues we have around us today still exist. So,
I'm listening to you.
good, good. So, if you were to look at that vis-a-vis what is still transparent in the Congo, I mean, the Congo is still an ongoing genocide in itself because, yes, we don't see massive killings as we see currently in Gaza. But if you look at it over time, I mean, in the 90s, they had what was called the Africa World War, where in the Congo itself, 6 million lives were lost. Because, again, the instruments of colonialism wanted a dip into the place called Congo. And they all came in. Oh, you go in there, you do this, you do that. Now, again, with the Berlin Conference in our rear mirror, and shall we say they have left, or are they still around? And if they are still around, in what shape and form?
Okay. Let me digress a bit. Then tell you that the injustices done to the black man are
Hmm,
widespread, but hardly spoken about by the white man, and hardly even read and studied by the black
hmm,
man. And in 1932, I just opened my computer so that I can reference the year. In
hmm,
1932, in the United States,
hmm,
the Center for Disease Control wanted to study the effects of untreated syphilis.
hmm,
They wanted to study the effects of untreated syphilis
hmm,
on people who obviously had that sexually transmitted disease. So, in order to carry out this experiment, they chose Africans, they chose African Americans, they chose blacks, and they told them they were on some experiment that was supposed to be treating their syphilis, and they were just giving them placebos just to cover the symptomatic illnesses associated with syphilis.
hmm,
A lot of these people died nasty, cruel deaths because syphilis took over their bodies and all of
hmm,
that.
hmm, hmm,
And it took a long while before the United States owned up to this and said, really, it is true, this happened. We actually experimented with the lives of Black Americans and we killed them by making them guinea pigs, living experimental groups. Now, I showed you that in America because that
That's
experiment,
the that's
uh,
the Tuskegee experiment, wasn't it?
yes, that's the toxic experiment. Now, that
Hmm,
experiment was learned from the colonial powers because Africa was the ground to test a lot of things during the colonial era. Africa was
hmm,
that place where you could come and massacre 6 million people and nobody would talk about it and nobody would talk about reparation. How many Jews were killed during the Holocaust? Around about the same figure of 6 million. Till
hmm,
today, Israel continues to hang it on the neck of everybody. There are laws in countries in Europe that, are called anti-Semitism laws where you
hmm,
cannot even say the Holocaust did not happen.
hmm.
You are labeled, Holocaust
You
denial, and
deny.
then you're sent to court. And do you know till today, Austria and Germany are still going after Nazis who
Mhm,
actively took part in the Holocaust.
hmm,
Even some of them who are 81, 94 years old, they are brought to justice. So, who's going to take Germany to task now on the experiment in Namibia? And it wasn't an experiment anyway. It was a deliberate extermination in the Namibia. Now, modern day Namibia, which was Southwest Africa, uh, Southern Africa at that point. Who's going to take them
hmm,
to task? Who's going to take Belgium to task on the very horrible things they did in the Congo, where people had their arms, cut off because they were on the opposing side of the colonialists. So the point I'm trying to make is that the inhuman treatment, the cruelty against the black man,
hmm,
continues in different forms. It has not left. They might not be here as white men again. They make sure that they bring companies. They make sure
hmm,
that they breed shadow parties that continue to make the black man look inferior and that continue to enslave the black man. The companies that mine cobalt, that mine all the minerals in the Congo, they are not Congolese countries. They are companies that are listed on the stock exchange somewhere, and they have this ethical, very lovely ethical outlook in their countries. They will not take bribes, will not pay kickback, but we will send a 7-year-old to a mine in Congo, and you will
Hmm.
buy 5,000 AK-47s and give to a warlord so that he can protect his mine. Oh no, that's not our own game. What we are going to do is to influence the military and make sure that they overthrow any government that doesn't give us access to their natural resources. So you see, when people say there is a natural resource, a natural
Hmm.
resource cost, meaning that once you have a natural resource, there's a cost to it. There is no natural resource cost. It is the interest in the natural resource that becomes the curse. Because once people know that, look, these guys have platinum, these guys have uranium, they then, they determine what they need to do to everyone around that resource. If they are compliant, malleable, and pliant enough to say, oh, okay, take it. You can continue to mine it at your will, my Lord and Savior. Oh, they'll be good. But if anybody in that locality or anybody, any nationality says, hello, no, 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 I object to that. I'm not going to allow you guys to go away with this. That guy becomes the
Hmm.
the the, the target that every colonial master is either willing to buy or to kill. So it's still happening in Africa. I mean, and the problem now is that the challenge is that there are now more players than even the ballenas. You now have Russia with the Wagner Group all over the Sahel, asking everybody, send away France. We'll help you to develop your military, we'll help you to develop your country, as long as you give us your natural resources. You've got the Belt Road and the Silk Road merchants from China.
Hmm.
They
I
are
know. Yep.
also in Africa now. And they're saying, look, don't worry, we'll make sure that you get loans that are not as stifling as the ones from the West, as long as you give us this natural resource. Just give us this mine and all of that. I mean, look at Zambia and copper. Zambia has been mining copper for a long time. They sold some of their mines to the Western countries who paid peanuts for it, money they could make in one year. They paid to the Zambian government and and they made it. And the Zambian government is still collecting the money after a few years.
Hmm.
So you see that continued enslavement in different forms by the same people. Now, the only problem now is that other parties have joined. China is now in the game. You're seeing Russia in the game, and all they're after is the resources that God has given to Africa freely.
Hmm. 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 Now, one of the fallout of that is okay, so you've got the resources. In order to control the said resources, you have to sometimes be present. And think we've spoken to that earlier with regards to settler colonialism. How is that still an issue in 2024?
Okay, let's look at some things. What legal system does Nigeria practice?
British legal system, the last
British
I
legal
checked.
system, which was built for a parliamentary system of government, a constitutional
Hmm?
monarchy. Nigeria borrowed it. And in true Nigerian style, we like to put our flair on everything. We then decided that we wanted our own presidential system of
Presidential
government
system of
like
government.
the
Yeah.
American system. What a confused system. Our educational system till today is still built around the British educational system to a point where people who own schools in Nigeria now actually pride themselves on running some bifurcated, what is it called, curriculum. They say British and American curriculum. They're
What?
just adding, yes, they're just adding more confusion to a child who's already confused. Okay?
Hmm.
What language do we speak in order to make ourselves um, very to understand ourselves? What is the language of trade? You go to French African countries, And in true French style, they take a break at 12. They lock up,
No.
yes, they lock up their shops. You can go to, I mean, from nowhere. I used to consult for for EcoBank, which is, a West African bank. And I remember that we left Nigeria. I went to Cotonou on our way to Senegal. And they told us that, look, at 12, everybody closes shop. Even schools close. You go back home, you rest, you eat, and then come back to school at 2, and the schools will close at 4. The culture, you are mimicking a culture for which you don't know why it was set up. So if you look at our educational system in Nigeria, we're fast realizing now that that educational system will not serve us. You have people now who speak very good English but cannot do anything with their hands. We have, so the colonial mentality is such that you think because you speak English, you're intelligent. But I am very sure that my ancestors were not daft. Because some of the things that I have found out in Yoruba land,
Hmm.
I'm sure my Zulu brothers, my Dinka brothers, my everybody. I mean, anytime somebody tells me that somebody discovered gravity because an apple fell on his head, I'm always like, how? Do you know how coconut falls in Africa? It falls very hard and it has a hard shell. If your head were to be under that coconut, you will learn gravity by force. Apples to learn gravity. I don't know when Yoruba said, Lala Toroke, Ile Lombo, but obviously they were talking about gravity. I mean, the Yoruba said, Toba, Ju Obe Soke Nigbagba, Ibi Pelebe lo ma fi lele. Meaning
Bó
they
ṣe wà
knew
nìyẹn o.
that there was some force that made sure that you couldn't continue to go up. You had to come down.
You-
And they said this in several ways. So my problem with us as Africans now is that the colonialists have left, the colonialism has not left. I mean, I speak to my Franco-African brothers and you hear see Paris and die, meaning that if you travel to anywhere in the world, but you have not been to Paris, then you have not lived. It is only when you get to Paris that you can then die and say, yes, I have lived. And I've been to the Paris, it is not cleaner than Lagos. Nothing happening in Paris. But you see, the branding for the African is that look, whatever does not have the stamp of the colonial master, whatever does not sound um, Western, whatever does not sound like it belongs to the white man, is not cool, it's not fun, and because
Hmm.
of that, I need to abandon it. So if you look at Nigeria, for example, now Nigeria is producing about 1.2 million graduates per year. Some of them studying courses that have nothing to do with their future or their history.
Hmm.
And you ask them to write something, write an essay. And the English, they cannot speak very well. Their local dialect, they cannot speak very well. So I call them the lost in transit generation. They're somewhere in between
Hmm.
trying to be Western and trying to be Africans. So in every area of our lives, the colonialists have left, but the colonialism has not left. In fact, what has happened is that the colonialism has moved from being physical
Hmm.
and then now it is mental.
Mental. Yep.
You see
Yep.
people say they
Hmm.
don't want to bear Native African names because they want to be John Jackson and Mr. Stone. And I mean, it's one of the things that make me feel like our educational system is still deficient.
Hmm. 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 I mean, I remember back in the day when we went to secondary school. Yes, we did suffer a bit of um, uh, corporal punishment when we spoke in our native dialect. But I think there was something ingrained in us that just made sure that that language will come out. We would speak it regardless of what the penalty was. But I think now there is almost a conformity, a need to conform to say, you know what, I am going to be seen to be sophisticated more than I am. By that I'm saying Even our music, it's only of late. I mean, I have to give it to them, the proponents of Afrobeats. It's only of late that has cut across. Do we see what transpired in Afrobeats coming and being the template for what else can go out from Africa in terms of our own identity? Because language is one. The language we speak, Yoruba, and so many other languages, are their own receptacles of history. So maybe that is a vehicle in itself. What do you think?
All right. First, let's talk about language. Every language is a relic of history.
Hmm,
Languages must be dragged into relevance. They are
hmm,
dragged into contemporalization. You drag a language that was spoken by your ancestors, you must drag it into contemporary times. If you don't drag it, it becomes a relic. It will only be studied by anthropologists who are going to be saying, oh, why did this language die?
hmm,
So the English language is so good because it keeps borrowing from other languages.
hmm, hmm.
Last year,
Yeah.
Japa entered the dictionary of the British.
For those who don't
Oka-
understand what Japa means, what does it mean?
Japa, is actually a combination of two Yoruba words. Jack means to run, to escape,
Hmm,
to let loose. Pa means extreme, meaning desperate measures. So Japa means to escape using any type of, to any type of measure, any type of situation, just escape. So, and it's a Yoruba language. Okada entered the British lexicon 2 years ago. So you see the British trying to contextualize and contemporalize their language by borrowing words from several um, other cultures, despite the fact that even the English language is derived mostly from, Latin,
yeah,
Latin,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
a lot of, French influence on the
French,
English
yeah.
language.
Hmm.
So African languages can be spoken in the digital age and can have relevance in the digital age. There is a
Hmm,
particular organization that is working on that in Nigeria. That's the same organization that worked on, Microsoft in Yoruba, Microsoft Suite in Yoruba, Microsoft Word in Yoruba, Excel in Yoruba, because these things exist. Now,
hmm,
people not wanting to speak their language don't understand that language is about 7% of culture.
hmm,
Whatever you cannot express in your language will not exist in your culture because you cannot think about it. Let me give you an example. The Yorubas call language Ede. Ede is language. Now, the beauty of the Yoruba language is that Ede means to tie.
hmm,
To de means to tie. And the Yorubas have a saying that Ede la fin de ero.
hmm.
You use your language to tie up, to institutionalize your thoughts. Meaning, without your language, you cannot institutionalize your thoughts.
Thoughts, yeah.
That's one.
Hmm,
A lot of my friends don't understand something. Every brain has an operating system, and that operating system is the language. I usually will tell a lot of people when you are in trouble, let's assume you are anywhere in the world and you see three policemen coming towards you. What language do you think in? And most times it is your mother tongue,
which one,
you
yeah.
know. And then in Nigeria, an African, in Nigeria, a Yoruba man will see three policemen and in his brain, he quickly says, Kilo shed. What's happening? Why is he not thinking English? And then there is the benefit of the brain that can speak several languages because several parts of your synapses can now fire. That's one.
Hmm,
Second is the richness of your narrative. But
hmm,
Africans don't even want to give that benefit to their young ones, which was why we were
hmm.
beaten for speaking vernacular. It was called then.
Yeah,
Our local
vernacular, yes.
journalists were
Yeah.
called vernacular.
Ooh.
Imagine. But the point now is, I realized that the more, and science has proven this, The more versed you are in your mother tongue, the better it is for you to learn English as a second language. Now, let me
True, true.
get back to my issue of music and then seeing whether we can do that. Nigeria has a very rich musical culture, and Ghana also has a very rich musical culture. What has happened between the two countries? And I say this authoritatively because I'm a musician. I play music. Uh, Nigeria started singing like the white man. We played music that the white man wanted to hear. We used a lot of horns, a lot of brass instruments. We played high life like the Ghanaians. The
Mm.
Yoruba man liked it because it looked like ballroom music. There was a lot of jazzy influence into it. There was a lot of military influence in it, and it fitted the persona of the colonialist who was wearing gloves, who was wearing a ball gown, who was wearing a suit, and was wearing a hat. So, this music was in the 70s, in the 60s and the 70s. Nightclubs in Nigeria and in Ghana played exactly the same music. In fact,
Mm.
musicians from Ghana, JT Mensah and all of that will come to Nigeria and play here for 2 months. And then Olaya, um, Bobby
Bobby
Benson, and all of
Benson.
them will
Yeah.
follow them to Ghana and
Mm.
do exactly the same. Now,
Mm.
something happened. By the 80s, Nigerians, the new generation of Nigerians decided to actually start singing like the Oyibo man. So you have all the DCK Falolas of this world, Penny's Liberties of this world, Chris Okuchies of this world, who were singing. They were mirroring Michael Jackson. I mean, if you look at Chris
Shiny.
Okochie, shiny hair and all of that. And he was trying to call African names like he was a British man or an American. I remember one of the songs, Ufama, Ufama, I want to
Mama.
marry you, give me your love. At that point, the Ghanaians were still doing,
High
what
life.
is it called? High life. But the Congolese and the Cameroonians started doing
Makosa.
what? Makosa. They were singing their own songs, their folklore, and it blew. The only Nigerian that followed that was Fela because he created an authentic African sound that had never been heard before and joined them in the 70s and the 80s. So immediately that happened. The authenticity of your own beat, your own narrative, your own language became the sole thing for your music to be listened to by the world. The next
Mm.
set of musicians after that were the juju musicians. Ebenezer Obey, Sonny Ade, also playing African music, and they were all over the world. They were in
Mm.
Japan, they were in all of that. The next set of African musicians decided, you know what? We're not going to sing like the Igbo man. We're going to sing our own story. We're going to use our own. And then you can talk about Two-Face
Pasuma.
Idubia and all of that. And then you
Mm.
start talking
Mm.
about Pasuma, Wasiu came out. By the 2000s, you saw the Banj, and you saw all of these guys who are now, they are not into conformity. They actually wanted to stand out, but they were singing in Yoruba, they were singing in Igbo, they were singing in any kind, Mekatele di Koko. You see a smattering of English, and one of my best tracks with the band is Oliver Twist, where he was talking
Mm.
about the only thing that was English that was Oliver, Oliver. So,
Mm.
but the Ghanaians still kept to a certain kind of music. My South African brothers still kept to a certain kind of music. The Nigerians just suddenly realized, look, if we tell our own story using our own instruments, using our own extravagant culture, people will listen, and that's what has happened. It's just like the way the Nigerians are taking jollof rice. I mean,
Even
a
though it's
rice
not.
that it's not us. The rice that traveled from Senegal and came to
Mm.
us through, the Simon people of Senegal, Sierra
No,
Leone,
Sierra Leone. Yeah.
who settled in Nigeria as, returned slaves, and we just taken it and owned it up and made it, blow up. So and it just tells me, even our economic model, we need
Mm.
to sit down and ask ourselves, do we want to fashion our economy like economies that got 400 years of free labor? We want to tell
Mm.
ourselves, look, why aren't Africans trading with Africans? I like it when Africans compete against Africans fairly.
Yep.
because
Yep.
we
Yep.
can
Yep.
grow it, brother. I like that. Like I'm watching the African football or the African Cup of Nations, and I'm seeing Nigeria's
Mm.
rivalry with Cameroon, and I saw Samuel Eto'o being consoled by the Nigerian
Yeah.
players after he burst into and I like that. Can we look at our own culture and say to ourselves, we were once rich, we were once stable nations. How can we go back to that rather than trying to ape economies that are not our
Are
own?
not meant to serve us. Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
meant to. I mean, how many? I remember that about 5, 10 years ago, Ghana was the poster boy for IMF interventions. They were telling us that the Ghanaian economy was strong, the Ghanaian economy was resilient. And 3 years now, Ghana has been going through a lot
Defaulted. Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
so I think the fact that we can sell our music, our story, our narrative tells us that
Mm.
something good can come. And I
Mm.
actually think Nigeria should be a very good exporter of high value, high performing human capital. If we
Mm.
tweak our educational system to be able to let the young ones um, find meaning in the future. Meaning, look, I can speak Yoruba, but I can code. I can
Mm.
write code. I can do cyber security. We will be able to export. We're 221 million people. Africa is a billion plus counting. And,
Mm.
the only narrative people think about when they hear the name of Africa is penury, poverty, and wars, and not knowing that a lot of that is caused by these countries. Look, let me even ask a very stupid question. How many African nations produce guns?
Well, South Africa during what's it called? During
Apartheid.
apartheid. Yeah, but I don't think they're still into it. I
So,
doubt it.
so, so why do we have where do we get all the guns that we use to kill ourselves?
We import now.
We import
Oh.
them. Some of them are even given free. There are the
Mm.
lords of war all over who come to Africa and say, oh, come. Dubile, you want to kill your brother? I have 2,000 AK-47s that I want to sell, but I am not going to collect money. Kill your brother first and give me that mine. And then,
Mm.
so all of this is happening. And, I'm just hoping one day we can sit down and ask ourselves um, a very important question. Do we want to die as fools?
Mm.
Do we want to
Do we
die
want
as
to
fools?
die as fools?
The
Wow.
narrative that has been given to us is you guys are fools. We're going to keep giving you weapons of, destruction to keep killing yourselves within your nation and within your continent. And we're going to make sure that that goes on for a long time. So you can't think about the major issues of how do you translate your um, natural resources into human development, and then how do you compete in the global space? So
Hmm.
I think the wars and all of that are distractions to make sure that Africans don't sit down and really fashion out a way out of the quagmire that we're in.
If you were as a learned person, if you were to, based on the information, the conversation we've just had, what book would you suggest?
Oh, okay. Now, because of cultural differences, one of the things I would like uh, to do is for everyone to first read Thomas Sankara first.
Hmm.
First read Thomas Sankara. There's a reason why I said Thomas Sankara because
Why?
he wasn't a political leader. He was some guy who just felt upper volta. The name revolted. I mean, he was riled up by the fact that look, how do you name me? First, you took my land without my permission. You
Concern.
guys sat somewhere,
Hmm.
you drew lines on the paper, and then they became lines on the sand. And then he was like, look, this is not how to run a nation. And you see Thomas Sankara philosophize about what Africa should be if we actually sat down and say, look, I'm going to elect somebody who um, will think about the people more than his harem. or more than the number of cars in his motorcade. Now,
Hmm.
let's be very clear with ourselves. The brand of Western democracy that has been sold to Africa has many false legs. It has many false legs. It is one of the reasons why a lot of places that are developing in the Middle East now don't practice democracy. Is
Hmm.
Dubai a democracy? Is Saudi Arabia a democracy? Is Qatar a democracy? Is the
Nope.
UAE a
Nope.
democracy? Is Kuwait a democracy? Is Jordan a democracy? So, first is I would love Africans to read Thomas Sankara because um, he understood the fact that a lot of African leaders that were foisted upon us at independence were actually colonialists at mind. In Nigeria, most of them studied abroad. Very few of
Hmm.
them came back to be able to impact us. That's one. I also think a lot of people should read Kwame Nkrumah and then read Awolowo because if you read Awolowo, you understand that governance is not rocket science.
Hmm.
I've read all Awolowo's books and I realized that he was clear-minded and intentional about the resources available to Nigeria and how to harness those resources to make sure that Nigeria became a big, strong, and powerful nation. If you read
Hmm.
Awolowo, you realize that he wasn't interested in oil, he wasn't interested in natural resources beyond the human development index of every region of Nigeria.
Hmm.
I also think people need to understand the mindset of the colonialist. And I think Mandela gives us that mindset of the colonialist, where he was saying,
Hmm.
look, you can fight the colonialist, you can have the spare of the nation, which is the militant
Hmm.
group
Yeah.
of the
It's
AFC.
good. Yeah.
Yes, but on the long run, you still have to sit down with the colonialist and say, I am your equal. You have to go.
Hmm.
So you have to go because um, if you brought a fight to my house and we fought in my house for 50 years, chances are that house is not habitable
Hmm. Structurally, yes. Yes.
structurally.
Yes.
But
Hmm.
if I beg you, that, okay, you know that fight, we'll still continue to, I mean, we're going to have that fight again, but why don't you leave a bit and give me space and we have this fight. So I think a lot of people need to read Mandela. So I think if people read Sankara, read Kwame Nkrumah, read Awolowo, read
Mandela.
Mandela, it will give you a sense of pride. That some of the things we're talking about today in Nigeria, some of the things we're talking about food security in Nigeria, security architecture, they were contemplated and discussed by Awolowo in the 60s. And some of the things that we see now in Nigeria, some of the things we see in Ghana, they were talked about by Awolowo and talked about by Kwame Nkrumah a long time. Now,
Hmm.
we're talking about the African Continental Trade Agreement that is supposed to ensure that Africans now trade within themselves
Within
and all
them.
of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was talked about in 1970 by Kwame Nkrumah. That
Hmm.
was talked about by Awolowo. So a lot of these things that African leaders now make us look as if
More intelligent.
they're intelligent. You're talking about an Africa that is one. They've been talked about before. You see, African nations tell us now that we're abolishing French as our official language and we're now going to speak our local language. That was a deliberate policy of education in Western Nigeria. People were taught in Yoruba language.
Yes. Hmm.
So I think the more Africans, I think the major problem is that history, historical awareness is lacking in Africans, and we seem to glorify everything that the white man writes. If you want to build
Hmm.
a business now, people will say read Jim Rohn. They will even tell you to read Trump, some guy who never ran a very good business, some guy who took more money in loans and still bankrupted his business on several occasions.
Read
And
Trump.
somebody will tell me to read Trump. And I'm
The
like,
art of
no,
the deal.
the art of, thank you, the art of the deal. And I'm like, no, I can't read Trump. You know, I used to be a fan of Robert Kiyosaki. I read all these books, the quadrant, the rich dad, poor dad, and all of that. And then I read all of the books and I realized, well, in Nigeria, there's no mortgage system. And the entire structure of wealth creation was based on
Built
the
around
mortgage
credit.
structure.
Yeah, your
Was
credit.
around credit. And I'm not in the credit economy. So if I continue to think like that and say, oh, I know a lot about wealth creation, the Robert Kiyosaki stuff, I will be fooling myself because I don't live in that kind of economy. I mean, so we need to contextualize a lot of our knowledge. And by not reading books that are so far from our reality and thinking that they're going to work. So I think our educational system also has a lot to do with this.
Well, Mr. Demola Adeosi, thank you very much. And that has been a very insightful conversation. How can people reach you if they obviously want to tap more into your wealth of knowledge?
Oh, I'm available. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. My full name is Demola.
What's your Twitter handle?
Oh, my Twitter handle is at Demolitics. DEMOLYTICS. And Demolitics. Same handle on Instagram. My Facebook page is Ademola. I have an European name there, Ebenezer Adewusi. Just talk to me, and this discussion is. I'm always ready to have a discussion like this because I just think a lot of this is now brain to think that we're inferior, to think that the white man does it better, but I'm not one of those who feel like that. I think it's our time we manifested our own culture and say to everyone that Africa can stand up and be counted as a very strong continent.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned something earlier, which also is on the radar to be spoken about later, which is using music as a weapon of liberation. So, as a musician yourself, at some point I'll reach out to you, and hopefully you would agree to come on again.
Oh, beautiful! I will be very happy to talk about music. Maybe I'll bring my fucking drum to talk to everyone who's listening. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. If you hold on, thank you.